I noted in the last lecture module that when we have the beginnings of the evolution of sensory organs and then ultimately of sensory systems that process the information gathered by those sensory organs, starting about 850 to 635 million years ago, we have this dramatic increase both in the amount and complexity of information that organisms can gather from their environment. That information becomes much more specific, and it also tends to increase the range of their informational environment, because now instead of just being sensitive to directionality of light, you might be sensitive to objects and the relationships in the three-dimensional space and things of this nature, right? It's a real increase. And because they evolve these sensory systems, they also start to evolve increased reliability. The simple mechanisms are grouped together and controlled in such a way that they aren't nearly as easily fooled, and adaptive responses become much more sophisticated as a result. The next big step is the sharing of information between individual organisms. And we see the emergence of this about 400 million years ago. The sharing of small, simple amounts of information between individuals in the form of fish schooling and shoaling about 400 million years ago during the Denovian period, or the age of fishes. And this allows an organism now to have a much larger informational environment. It increases the size of it significantly, because now where you're looking isn't the only place where you're gathering information, because where the other members of your group are looking, you can also gather information and communicate that information to each other. And fish shoaling works very easily, very simply. The fish are swimming together. When a fish on one side of a shoal or a school sees a predator, they'll turn, and that turn will just propagate itself through the whole school, because now they are sensitive to each other's movements and they respond in the same way to a particular threat, or if they're hunters, to a particular prey. So the sharing of simple, small amounts of information, it increases the size and also the diversity of the information ecosystem. Now, human beings take this to a level that we don't see in other creatures. Some creatures have pretty elaborate signal systems. Some creatures can even be taught basic sorts of sign language. But human beings evolved the ability to speak and process complex sentences in the form of spoken languages somewhere around 50 to 100,000 years ago. And this really differentiates human beings from other creatures, because now we're capable of exchanging relatively complex amounts and large amounts of information through spoken language. It also increases the temporal dimension of our information ecosystem, because now people can share their experiences not just here and now with signal systems or shoaling, right? But now they can share their life's experience with each other by describing it verbally, by creating oral histories and so on. And so you see a dramatic increase in the temporal dimensions of an informational environment for these organisms. And this emerges, we think, around 50 to 100,000 years ago, when we start to see evidence of more abstract, complex thoughts like cave paintings, body pigmentation, or ornamentation, and things of that nature. The ability to communicate relatively large and complex bits of information with each other using spoken language is really dependent upon our cognitive limitations. You can only convey as much information as someone can understand, someone can consolidate into long-term memory, and so on. But with the evolution of written languages and number systems, now that's a real game changer, because you're no longer dependent exclusively on the limitations of human memory systems. Instead, you're externalizing memory. And this allows you to increase the amount of information, the complexity of information, and the duration. You can also now manipulate that information in ways that the externalization of that information into the world allows you that you really couldn't do if you were just dependent upon, for instance, your working memory capacity. The evolution of written languages and number systems begins approximately around 7500 BCE. We see early tally sticks. Those are primitive counting devices where you notch a stick to indicate you've counted one member of something. And ideographic systems like the ones you see on these tablets here from 660 BCE or 6600 BCE. And we don't see the evolution of what we think of as contemporary languages and number systems until around 3200 to 3400 BCE, when we start to see the evolution of at least syllabary languages and number systems that have recursive capacities. Now, having all that information is fantastic, but you only have access to information that's available within a community. And so increasing the size of your community, the number of individuals you interact with, can also dramatically increase the amount of information that you have access to. Now, you're limited by your ability to communicate with those individuals. And so when we see the increase in trade, and this is a picture of the Silk Road, which was a trading both nautical and land-based system, then this is about circa 202 BCE, right? But we start to see increasing trade much earlier even than that. And no one really traveled all the way on the Silk Road, for example. Instead, what happened when an individual would buy something, they would travel maybe 50 or 100 miles from where they had bought that, and then they would resell it. But they would carry with them information about what was happening, how people were thinking. They would exchange languages and hence allow for greater freedom of information flow and so on. And so this dramatically increases the ability to exchange information. New ideas can now travel across longer distances and affect more individuals. Unfortunately, other things like diseases also travel on the Silk Road, but information certainly does. And by increasing the size and diversity of your ecosystem, the number of participants, right, now you've also increased your potential access to novel innovation and so on. We'll pick this up in the next lecture module.